If rest was just about stopping, you'd probably feel restored right now and probably wouldn't need this podcast episode. Yeah, I get it. Maybe you don't always give yourself that time to rest, but there's been times when you did give yourself time to rest. You tried. You put the phone down, you sat still, you did nothing, and you told yourself, this is me time. I'm doing this once for myself. I'm doing nothing. And just a few minutes later, you most likely felt like agitated. I don't know if you're like me, like you felt like a kid in timeout and you're like counting the minutes to just see like when you can get up, when you can start doing, checking on someone, crossing things off to be useful. And that feeling that we get when we feel like we're trying to rest, but we feel so agitated, it's not because you're incapable of rest. That's the thing I want you to know. It's not that you're incapable of rest. It's that actually rest doesn't come from doing less. And that's something I had to learn the hard way, that rest does not come from doing less. Rest isn't about relaxation. I always thought rest was about relaxation, but rest actually really isn't about relaxation. It's more about whether your body feels safe. And your body hasn't most likely felt safe because it's been trained to prioritize this feeling of comfort or what's familiar. And what sucks is that for most of us, what's familiar is feeling stressed. It's waiting for that next shoe to drop. It's checking on who needs you next. It's being in control, and it's not about rest. Rest isn't familiar. And I used to think if I could only just stop doing and take a moment and pause, I'd finally feel the relief that my body and my mind needed. But what no one has really been talking about, and why I want to have this podcast episode, is that there's this unconscious performance mode that's still running in the background whenever we are trying to quote unquote rest. It's that mode that keeps you on high alert. It's that mode that makes you feel like ease and rest feels irresponsible. Oh my God, do I dare say lazy? That guilt comes in. There's even that whisper that someone still needs you. And even when your body is begging for, like, it just needs to just breathe. It needs to feel safe because right now it doesn't feel safe and comfortable. It needs that pause. And so today, my hope for this podcast episode is that we'll really start unpacking what really happens underneath the surface, like all like the patterns, reflexes, and nervous systems that has you feeling like rest is sabotaging you from the inside out. And really getting to understand why the pause doesn't feel peaceful. And that's where we start. Because when you're able to understand why the pause doesn't feel peaceful, that's when you can start to rewire your relationship with rest. Welcome to the Hello Well with Danielle podcast episode, your weekly mental vacation from the daily grind for busy women who just need a moment to pause, breathe, feel safe, and woosah. I am your host, Danielle Washington, and I wanted to have this series about rest, and I didn't want it to feel very like wellness performance-y, like, oh, you just need to relax. You just need to give yourself permission. You just need to give yourself space and, let go of things. There's some of that plays into that. But last week, if you didn't hear last week's episode, I was really talking about how you're not failing rest, rest is failing you. But in this episode, I really wanted to focus in on the why rest doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't feel peaceful, it doesn't feel like relief. And I want to start this conversation off by saying this isn't a mindset issue. It's not a motivation. You need to motivate yourself to rest more. You need to change your mindset per se to rest more. That's not the issue. It's not that your mind and body is purposely trying to sabotage your rest. It's that your mind and body are actually trying to protect you. In its eyes, everything that's doing rest, which feels unfamiliar, which equals unsafe, it's saying rest is a threat. Resting is a threat. So the mind and body have been trained that rest is a threat. So it's like, hey, I'm trying to protect you. you don't get it. You keep trying to do this, do nothing, and trying to quote unquote rest. Your body's like, girl, this isn't comfortable. This isn't safe. I am protecting you. So it starts sounding like this massively loud alarm. And the reality is behind that is this training, this mindset, this kind of the body thinking rest is a threat didn't come from nowhere. It didn't come out of the blue. You weren't just, born with this random gene that happened to make you feel like rest isn't comfortable. It doesn't feel safe. It comes from the cultural messages that we have, this grind culture that you must always, do. Your worth is tied to how much that you do, how productive you are. And then there's this ancestral memory that I know I've talked about before in this podcast episodes. But this ancestral memory, especially if you are a woman of African descent or slavery, where rest wasn't just about being lazy. Rest was like if you looked like you were even deeming to be resting, you could get killed. So that high alert and that stress of that ideal of if I look like I'm resting, I could be killed is still in our DNA. If we stop, there was just this risk. And then the other side of that is that this lived trauma, this hyper responsibility that we have, like if we don't hold it all together, everything falls apart. So I can't rest. I even had a podcast episode recently talking about how when you don't trust yourself to fall apart. And when you can't trust yourself to fall apart, you're still always on. And that's the background behind that. We kind of pulled up the hood on all that situations is your nervous system. It's that your nervous system doesn't feel safe. And that's part of the lack of rest, is that we don't feel regulated. The nervous system is feeling like it has to be on high alert. So it sends the signal to your body that alert, something's wrong, we need to be protected. And this shows up in many different ways because these aren't choices that you're making. These are physiological patterns that live within each and every one of us. And they're different. They show up differently. For someone whose nervous system response, go-to pattern is flight mode, you're probably thinking stillness triggers that voice that's like, hey, you're being lazy. You're going to fall behind. And you feel that you need to do something, even if it's just mentally planning the next task. And it's that when your flight mode is your dominant nervous system response, it's that internal pressure that comes up. If flight mode is your dominant nervous system response, you start seeking distraction. You may open your phone, scroll, look, I call it the squirrel syndrome. Like, what can I look at next? You get up to clean, not because you want to, but because stillness is too loud and it doesn't feel safe. The other nervous system response is freeze mode, was when you start shutting down. This is when you may lie down, you start to feel numb, disconnected, mentally checked out. But the difference is your body is still, but your mind feels stuck in the fog. And the last one is fawn mode. And this is what I call the caretaking guilt. I sometimes fall into this one easily. This is when you start thinking about others, like, okay, I'm resting, I'm taking time for me, I'm doing nothing. And then your mind starts saying, well, okay, well, now I have some extra time. Like, who needs you? Like, who's waiting on you? Who have you been letting down because you've been unavailable that you now have quote unquote time because you're resting to think about them, be there for them. Your attention basically in this situation is automatically leaves yourself and goes into who can I help? And it's your body doing what it thinks it needs to do to keep alive in all four of these situations. So what actually happens when you try to rest and you can't, or you try to rest and you feel like agitated? What's happening is that you are entering in what I'm calling this unconscious performance mode. So even though you may be still, the mind is still rehearsing, the body is still bracing, the energy is still scanning for what needs to happen, or is there anything that feels still unsafe? You're in that on mode which feels safe and familiar. But what we talked about before, just because it feels safe and familiar doesn't mean it's healing. It doesn't mean it's in your best interest. But your mind and body don't know that. Stillness for your mind and body will feel risky, irresponsible, selfish, dangerous, because the body doesn't know it's not safe. Sorry, wrong thing. The body doesn't know that it is safe. It doesn't know that it's okay. It's okay to let go. It's okay to drop the shoulders. It's okay to unclench the jaw. And that, y'all, is the setup. Because your body doesn't feel safe. No matter how many times you stop and do nothing, if your body and mind are constantly feeling danger, danger, danger when you try to rest, that's why rest will never feel restorative. So it's trying to work through the narratives and the nervous system responses, because we can't change what our ancestors' DNA passed down to us, this feeling of high alert on rest. But what we can change is how our nervous system responds to rest, how our mind and body can start to feel safe and not feel like it needs to protect you when you are resting. And that's the, like, I don't know, the only way I could say it is like, you can't force rest. You can try to force rest, but I can tell you right now, it most likely won't hit. It won't feel good for you. You can only create the conditions for your body to feel safe enough. And that starts with understanding these patterns. That's the awareness of how the resistance shows up for you, because it may show up differently for me than it does for you. How those unconscious performance modes are still playing out in your life, knowing those ways that it shows up, whether it's like you're controlling or you do some caretaking things, all these different ways that it shows up, when you can be aware of that and ask yourself, what does it take to feel safe in my body and in my mind? And you start moving towards those ways, that's when you can make the biggest shifts. Because until that happens, rest won't feel like relief. It'll just feel like resistance. And I get some of this is easier said than done, because some of this stuff about the nervous system and that unconscious performance mode may be new to some people, or you may know about it but not know how to get out of it. In next week's episode, we're really breaking down how can we reimagine what rest is. And in this, we're basically figuring out how can we tell our mind and body that we're safe to rest. So I hope you join me. Until then, ciao. Thanks for joining us this week on the Hello Well with Danielle show. Make sure to visit our website, hellowellwithdanielle.com, where you can subscribe to our show on iTunes, Spotify, and Amazon Music and never miss an episode. Also, you can follow us on social media at Hello Well with Danielle on Facebook and Instagram, and Hello Well Danny on Twitter. And if you like hella love the show and got some good nuggets out of it, know that I'm not too proud to ask for you to please leave a rating or review on iTunes so that we can continue to expand our reach and help other women of color. Again, thanks so much for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Ciao.